Be cruel with purpose, but be kind with energy. This is an idea I wrote for myself first in 2019 and has informed the way I talk about media and games on the internet. I am someone who considers himself invested in the idea of including people in making games, someone who wants to encourage people to try to make things, even as I am someone who gets mad at things that I think are bad. If someone is doing a bad job, or if I think a work fails in a way that merits cruelty, then the question that follows needs to be, is being mad about this worth it? Who can get anything out of this? Similarly, if there's a game that's got good points that I like and is being made by a smaller group of people, then spending energy praising those points to draw attention to the good ideas, in the hopes of helping those ideas be part of the conversation about games, seems to me to be a better use of my energy than complaining about the interface of a game made by people who are struggling to pay the bills. This is informed by an attempt to do what Marshall Rosenberg refers to as giraffe language, the idea that I can somehow, while talking about games, try to ask the question, how can I make your life more wonderful? There's a place and a time in games for its counterpart, jackal language, but this game, today, is not a time or a place for jackals. I want to tell you the story of Flocking Hell, a game I like, a game I want you to look at, and a game that I'm looking at because I was asked to. Flocking Hell is a turn-based strategy roguelike deck builder game where you are the explorer of a tiny island of sheeple, who are trying to go on about their lives and build their towns and pursue their interests while waiting on someone, you, to do infrastructure projects like reinforcing walls and connecting trade routes in the name of preparing the sheeple for an eventual demonic invasion. This invasion is something predictable and procedural, and that means that your time spent on the island is about gathering the resources you can in the time you have. This timing is further complicated by a periodic timer, where every 5 turns the things you found will generate resources. It's a good example of a design I think of as 5 fires, 4 buckets. There are a lot of things you can do, and they will almost all improve your chances against the eventual demon invasion. They can all deal with something like the problem, but they won't all deal with the problem in the same scope or in the same way from situation to situation. Then, complicating this set of priorities, there are cards you get that let you change how your towns work, or how things like the roads interact. And then each island can have different rules, like wanting separate road networks, or a curse you have to deal with, or ways to make resources cheaper. And all those things mean that it's a game with a lot of choices and a lot of ways to do okay. The game is broken into chains of 7 islands, and then it resets. Am I any good at it? Nah, definitely not, no. I'm pretty poor at this game. Of course, this being a game in development, it is in development, right? I did say that. There's always a moving target for balancing the game. This is kind of the thing Flocking Hell made me want to talk about to an extent. I want to talk to you about giving good feedback on games you've played. First things first, after you've played a game, as an example of how games work in your mind, try to write out the instructions for how to play the game you just played from memory of what you played. Odds are going to be real good you can't get all of them from memory, and if you go back and check, you'll find something important you missed. Sometimes something you don't even think of as being part of the rules, like setting the game up. This is not a bad thing at all, and it's a practice to do to teach yourself what parts of rule systems stick in your head and how you remember things in games. Second, remember that as a player, you cannot be wrong about how you feel, but you might be wrong about what you remember. For example, you might feel bad about how the game worked out, but you might not understand why it happened that way, and you might think you encountered a bug or a glitch, but instead what happened is you missed an important piece of information. This isn't bad feedback to give, by the way. If you miss something you're meant to know, and it's important, and the players should know it in general ahead of time, the designers should be able to hear you tell them, hey, here's what I think happened, and you get to accept it if they tell you that is a mistake on your part. Mistakes in gameplay experiences are in this case morally neutral. You can think a choice is stupid or not like it, but that doesn't mean you're bad or a failure if someone disagrees with you. Consider games like I Want to Be the Guy. That's a game where you're not supposed to be able to tell ahead of time the things that are bad. It's meant to be a thing you practice and grind through. Remember that you are just one player, one person who may be of many or a few giving feedback. Most games with a degree of commercial success have player bases in the hundreds or thousands or even much more, and to them, there's a lot of information about how to perfectly deliver the experience and how to fine-tune it for a median group of players. When you're one of a small number of playtesters, that information just doesn't exist. So you may need to remember that you may be playing the game wrong, or the game may be broken, but also the game may not yet be teaching you how to play right. And so the confusion is somewhere that may not be in rules or player, but in motivation. I'm trying so hard to not bust out Jesper Juul here as well. It's a booklet called The Art of Failure. It's quite good. It's hard to say when you're one of a small number of players whether the game is doing something wrong or you haven't learned the game right. And with all games, that's a negotiation between people who can't actually be completely honest with one another about their degrees of success and failure. There needs to always be some flex. Some play, as it were. These lessons go in reverse, though, and this is something I want to hold up as a specific virtue of Flocking Hell. Communicating with the developers at Sextant Studios, I was able to give my feedback honestly and clearly, and when these questions of communication came up, it was never framed to me as, hey, are you sure you did things right? My feedback was treated as serious input from a player, and its ramifications were considered. At the same time, there are some things that just have to be filed under the, yeah, it'd be nice category, like making the cards prettier. Some things just have to be done with the budget you have and maybe improved later. This is, by the way, why I want you to check this game out. See, Flocking Hell is a delightful game in the genre that inspires me the term microgrinder. It is a game much like Minesweeper, where yes, there are ways to get better, but those ways of getting better are going to be built through long-term practice and steady development of techniques. Sure, I can sit at each screen pausing and calculating odds on things to try and determine an optimal strategy, but I will also develop trends of play just through playing more, playing enough, and becoming familiar with how the game feels in different stages. Minesweeper, by the way, is a hell of a comparison. That game is really interesting, and it's hard to be really good at it. Know what else Flocking Hell reminds me of? Desktop Dungeons, another microgrinder that treats black space on the map as a reusable resource. I liked a lot until I installed it, so I'd get other things done. But also, and I promise this isn't a joke, you know that game you see ads for on Tumblr or Reddit, or you have installed an ad blocker so you don't see them at all? The game where you're walking down a hallway, making a path, passing through gates that multiply or divide your little squad. You know those fake games that don't actually exist? When you finish a round in Flocking Hell, there is a surprisingly similar feeling of watching the moment at the near end of those ads, where the door bursts open and suddenly the protagonists of the game are running backwards and trying to survive while making decisions about getting attacked, and all you can really do is watch a large number whittle down and hope it's whittling down fast enough. But also, the rate of change changes. It is, in a lot of ways, a very fun kind of nail-biter, a grand denouement to your island. I played Flocking Hell a month ago, and this was written and recorded back then. I wanted to make sure I got my thoughts out about the version of the game I played. That's why I'm not going hard into strategies or advice for how to play. Chances are good, anything about the game as I played it is going to be different for you when the game launches in a few days. Because the game launches in a few days. You should check it out when it launches in a few days. I think this game is interesting and cool. I'm not going to get down to the talk about the incentives of game reviews. That's a whole video of its own. Maybe go into it somewhere. I was raised on PC format. I don't get review copies, and trust me, look at what we're doing here. Look at the subscriber count. Nobody's here trying to chase my clout and currying me with free copies of games for my powerful financial incentives. I'm a nobody who coincidentally is an academic with a keen interest in games who was able to give some useful feedback. Now, I was asked to look at Flocking Hell by the designers at Sextant Studios as best I can tell because they saw me talking about games, Cobalt Core, another deck builder, and thought I might have something interesting to say about this one. Some of it I've said to them. Hopefully it's helped to make the game better. Hopefully you'll get to say similar things and you get to make the game better too. I've said in the past that people make things because of spite or horny. Either they want the thing to exist or they're mad that it doesn't yet. This game feels like something made by people who had the idea, they played with the systems of the game, and they liked it so much they wanted to share it. This is a game that exists to be shared.